Hey guys, tonight we slip beneath a jungle canopy so thick, the moon has to negotiate for space. The air is heavy like velvet soaked in sweat, and it clings to your skin with the quiet confidence of something that's been alive far longer than you. Fireflies blink like the jungle's own nervous system, flickering just enough to guide your eyes and play tricks on your senses. You're standing barefoot on a mossy trail, where every step sinks you into a story that almost didn't survive. Stories whispered, not written. Stories carried by wind, tattooed on skin, steeped into roots, and drunk with trembling hands. You're not here for treasure or gold or some colonial prize. You're here for the forbidden whispers of passion. The Amazon's long-lost aphrodisiacs. They don't look like much. Some of them are crushed bark in a clay bowl. Others are oily seeds strung into a necklace that doesn't go around your neck. One is just a petal red, curved like a tongue, and you've already been warned not to sniff it too deeply. Here in the Amazon, lust didn't come wrapped in silk sheets or whispered in poetry. It came with dirt under the fingernails, rituals that smelled of sweat and citrus, and eyes that watched from behind leaves. You think you know desire, but the jungle has its own dictionary. And tonight, you're going to learn to read it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Share your location and what time you're tuning in from. I'm always fascinated to see how far these sleepy stories travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take a cautious step forward, brushing aside a curtain of vines that smell like wet tea leaves and pepper. Somewhere to your left, something chirps like a child's toy, and then it goes silent. The jungle is full of watchers. You're not just walking through a forest. You're entering someone's house. And that someone has been watching humans fall in love, lose their minds, and brew dubious potions for a very, very long time. The first people to live here long before names like Amazon were even invented didn't separate sex from survival. To them, seduction wasn't something you reserved for the bedroom. It was in the hunt, the storm, the fermented fruit you left to rot, just long enough to create courage. The jungle demanded courage. You couldn't walk into a stranger's territory, make eye contact, and say, "I think you're cute." You had to signal. You had to prepare. Sometimes you had to chew the root that made your heart race and your voice go syrup sweet. One of those roots was Yoko. You might see it now twisted and half sleeping beside a tree that probably predates your entire family line. Yoko was bitter, like jealousy, and had caffeine levels that made Red Bull look like sleepy tea. But when prepared in a ceremonial brew and taken before a communal gathering, Yoko didn't just wake you up, it turned you on. It made you feel sharp, charming, charismatic. Or at least, that's what people believed. Maybe it didn't have a molecule labeled desire, but the context, the firelight, the chance, the bodies moving just a little too close did the rest. Nearby, there's a different tree, shorter, humbled by time. It's the Po Mulatto, or mulatto stick, a name that already feels like a colonial mispronunciation of something more sacred. It peels in copper-colored strips, and its bark smells like cinnamon and secrets. Some tribes believed that boiling it in water and drinking it during the waxing moon made women more fertile and men more tender. Again, no one agrees on the exact science. Historians still argue whether this was a real fertility enhancer or just a cleverly marketed herbal tea with benefits. But what is undeniable is the ritual, the pause, the intention that you crouch to inspect. A plant shaped like a fan with edges so jagged it looks like gossip. It's jabarandi, another favorite in the Amazon's sensual toolkit. When chewed, it induces intense sweating. Not exactly glamorous, but some believed it cleansed the desire, opening up the body to intimacy without shame. Imagine showing up to a date drenched in honest sweat, not perfume, an offering of your unfiltered self. That was the Amazonian way. No masks, just medicine. But these rituals weren't casual. They had structure. Sometimes they were administered by a shaman, often old, always wise, occasionally mischievous, who knew the exact dose that would help, not harm. Sex with Kings by Eleanor Herman describes royal lovers in Europe manipulating aphrodisiacs to maintain power. But here in the jungle, it wasn't about control. It was about connection. The jungle didn't care if you were a king or a hunter. It cared if your body could dance to the drumbeat of life and not get eaten while doing it. You feel something tickle your ankle. A vine? No, it moves. You glance down and find a line of ants marching like a tiny parade, each carrying a piece of petal that looks suspiciously like the ones you were warned about. These aren't ordinary ants. Some tribes believe that letting them bite you just once could increase libido, or madness, or both. It's hard to be sure. The line between pleasure and pain is blurry here, softened by humidity and myth. Speaking of myths, the erotic spirit through history isn't all about potions. Sometimes it's gestures, a glance, a dance, an offering of fish smoked with maracuya passion fruit, quite literally. One story tells of a young man who climbed a tree barefoot, gathered a rare blossom, and gave it to his crush. She sniffed it, smiled, and later that night, they disappeared into the vines. Days later, they returned, slightly disheveled but glowing. The elders nodded, no punishment, just quiet approval. Nature had spoken. There's also the story, perhaps exaggerated, of a woman who painted her lips with uricum, the red pigment found in achiote seeds. Supposedly, any man who kissed her would dream of her for 7 nights and wake up missing. Her for 7 more. Scientists say it's just a dye. Local storytellers say it's a spell. Which do you believe? You're chewing on that question when you realize you've been walking in a circle. The jungle does that. It seduces with stories and then laughs as you forget the path you came in on. So now as the night deepens and your shirt sticks to your back, you begin to wonder how many of these aphrodisiacs were real and how many were just excuses to take a risk. Because in the Amazon, love wasn't candlelight and champagne. It was risk. It was roots that bit back. It was petals with consequences. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most honest version of desire there is. You're still walking, but the jungle feels thicker, now closer, like it's pressing in with curiosity. Branches no longer wait for you to pass. They tug at your sleeves like mischievous children asking questions. The shaman's hut appears not as a building, but as a suggestion half draped in hanging moss, its roof woven with palm thatch, its entrance low enough to make you bow, as if entering a cathedral of the absurd. Inside, it smells like 1,000 years of secrets. Old wood smoke, damp clay, dried herbs, and something sharp, like crushed citrus rind left too long in the sun. The shaman sits cross-legged by a fire that refuses to be photogenic. It crackles, spits, dies, and flares like it's performing for an audience of ghosts. His eyes, one lazy, one alert, glint like mica under firelight. He doesn't speak in full sentences. Instead, he gestures to the gourd in front of him, filled with a brew that looks like river mud having a tantrum. This is the real deal. The shaman's secret brew. Arousal in a bowl. You hesitate. Of course you do. You've had coffee. You've had wine. But this has been prayed over, chanted to, stirred clockwise by fingers stained from bark and berries, and possibly blood. And you're not sure if drinking it will make you love better or just see your ancestors. Probably both. He nods toward it with that look people give when they've seen tourists pass out before. You take a breath so deep it sounds like commitment. Then raise the gourd. It's warm, earthy, smells like fermented compost and rain. You sip, it doesn't burn. It blooms. First in your mouth, bitterness, sweetness, something minty, something you can't name. Then in your chest, a heat that rolls outward like a slow-motion firework. And then in your head, a lightness like you've just remembered. Something very important and very old. This is not a date night cocktail. This is liquid theater. It's the star of a ritual where you are both audience and participant, and desire isn't just expected, it's summoned. The brew isn't meant to seduce. It's meant to cleanse the distractions, the social scripts, the weird pressure to be impressive. It strips you of the persona. What's left might be someone who actually wants to touch another person, not to conquer, but to connect. And here's the twist: historians still argue whether these brews were purely symbolic or genuinely biochemical. Some say the active compounds were minor. Others suggest we've barely begun to decode their pharmacological impact. One anthropologist claimed that the ritual mattered more than the recipe. Another argued the shaman's chants might have altered your brain waves just enough to make you feel, well, desirable. Not sexy in the magazine sense, but sensually attuned, aware of breath, texture, proximity. Modern dating apps could never. The shaman watches as your eyes adjust. He hums something that might be a song or a warning. Around you, the hut breathes. No, really, it moves slightly with each gust of wind, like it's exhaling. He begins to tell you a story, not imperfect. Portuguese or Spanish, but in a language older than either. You catch words like spirit, woman, jaguar, and fire. You recognize the universal cadence of gossip. Apparently once, a woman drank too much of this brew and fell in love with a man she'd previously threatened to kill. She kissed him in front of the entire tribe during a ceremonial dance. They later built a hut together and had 7 children, who all became drummers. True? Unclear. Believed? Absolutely. As the story swirls around you, the hut begins to fill with steam, not smoke, but a kind of botanical fog that rises from a cauldron in the corner. This is part 2 of the Aphrodisiac experience, the vapor bath. Leaves of all kinds, guarana, cachuaba, and something ominously called heart root are being boiled. The steam is meant to open your pores, yes, but also to invite the spirits in or out. Depends on who you ask. You sit in it, sweat pouring from you like secrets, and feel the jungle coming inside your skin. Your heart thumps politely at first, then with a little more urgency, like it's knocking to be let in on something juicy. You don't hallucinate, not quite, but the edges of reality blur like someone just wiped fog off a mirror, and what you see underneath is your own desire, messy, honest, unfiltered. In the history of sexuality, Foucault argued that power and pleasure are always intertwined, that we regulate sex not to suppress it, but to channel it into socially approved structures. But here in the Amazon, before the missionaries and trade ships and maps, sex wasn't regulated. It was revered. The shaman's brew wasn't about control. It was about openness. The goal wasn't monogamy or fertility or conquest. It was vitality, energy, wholeness. You weren't taking a potion to attract someone else. You were aligning yourself so you could feel again, clearly, fully, without apology. That's something even modern therapy can't bottle. You close your eyes and lean back, letting the herbal vapor swirl over your face, your neck, your chest. You remember that in ancient ceremonies, this moment, this steaming, sweating, softened moment was when couples would look at each other and know. Not know names or income or astrological compatibility, but know something deeper. That yes, you were both animals under this sky. And maybe, just maybe, your bodies had something honest to say to each other. There's a sound outside. A low rhythm, drumming. It doesn't demand movement, it invites it. You stand, dazed but alert, and step into the night again. The air smells different now, smokier, richer, as if the trees have begun to cook their own stories. You follow the rhythm, your feet sticky with resin and meaning. You're not seduced. You're softened. And in this softening, you begin to understand what the shaman's brew was never meant to teach with words. You follow the rhythm as if your feet have grown ears. Every beat from the distant drum pulls you deeper, not just into the jungle, but into the very idea of desire shaped by leaves, shadows, and heat. It's not a party rhythm. It's older than parties. It's the sound trees make when they remember the people who used to speak to them. As you move, the trees seem to step aside, giving you glimpses, not just of where you're going, but of what this jungle used to be before maps carved it into chunks and travelers carried away more than stories. You find yourself at the edge of a clearing. A group has gathered dancers, drummers, watchers. No one speaks, no one has to. The fire in the center is low and flickering, throwing shy gold light that barely reaches the tree line. At the far edge, just beyond the circle of light, you spot something peculiar. A long table, woven from vines and reeds, topped with leaves the size of small blankets. And on those leaves, laid out as carefully as fine cheese at a Parisian picnic, are fish, dozens of them. Silvery, wide-eyed, and staring into eternity. The tambaqui, not just food, not just decoration. In some Amazonian stories, this fish was believed to make people flirt just by being near it. No, it didn't whisper compliments or wear tiny fish tuxedos. But its flesh, when smoked and consumed under moonlight, particularly during ceremonies of courtship, was thought to loosen the tongue, warm the chest, and turn introverts into poets. You step closer. The air above the fish smells smoky, nutty, with a strange sweetness like overripe melon. Someone offers you a piece wrapped in a leaf and sprinkled with what looks like crushed petals. You chew. It's rich, buttery, soft as a secret dot. As you eat, an elder leans in, eyes twinkling, and tells you the story of two lovers who met over tambaqui. A hunter and a weaver. They had nothing in common except their taste in fish. At the annual fire gathering, they both reached for the same piece of smoked tambaqui and touched fingers. Years later, after children and storms and a jaguar attack, they still swore that fish was the reason they fell in love. Romantic? Possibly. Slightly fishy? Definitely. But that's the Amazon. It doesn't hand you love in clean packaging. It wraps it in rituals, scents, strange animals, and memories half invented by moonlight. Anthropologists who visited the region during the early 1900s took notes on these ceremonies, dancing, feasting, and yes, the way certain foods were believed to open the body to affection. Of course, when these same anthropologists published their findings, the notes often got scrubbed of their sensuality. Tambaqui became protein. The moon became lighting conditions. The ceremonies were listed as communal events. But the locals knew better, and they still do. Even now, the tambaqui is more than dinner. It's a key. Not to the bedroom, necessarily, but to something softer. The part of us that remembers seduction isn't about domination. It's about invitation. Now, let's be real. Did the fish contain a libido-boosting compound? Maybe, maybe not. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were based on observation or wishful thinking. Some claim the fish's high omega content may have affected mood. Others point to placebo effects amplified by community ritual. One fringe theory even suggests the fish absorbed plant alkaloids from the riverbed, which may have had subtle stimulant properties. But in truth, it probably wasn't about the fish at all. It was about what the fish represented, a shared experience, a slow pleasure, a ritual that said, we're not just surviving, we're celebrating. As the drums continue, you notice the dancers have shifted formation. No more circles. Now they move in pairs, not touching, but orbiting each other, weaving in and out like planets flirting with gravity. One dancer wears a necklace made of fish bones and red beads. Another has painted her arms with symbols that look like vines trying to remember a language. They don't smile. They don't need to. Their bodies tell the story. Slow, deliberate, hypnotic. The kind of dance that doesn't want an audience, it wants accomplices. You watch and realize this isn't performance. It's offering. Each movement is an echo of courtship rituals older than agriculture. Before people planted seeds in the earth, they planted intentions in each other. And here, in the jungle, movement still carries meaning. A tilt of the head says, "I see you." A sway of the hips says, "Do you see me back?" The dancers finish their set without applause. Instead, they walk to the tambaqui table, eat in silence, and drink from a shared bowl. Probably the same brew you tasted earlier. Full circle dot in Sex with Kings. Eleanor Herman writes about the calculated seductions of royal courts, perfumed letters, jeweled corsets, staged entrances. But here, in the Amazon, seduction is less about artifice and more about attunement. You're not trying to dazzle someone into loving you. You're trying to become soft enough, honest enough, receptive enough to notice when love or at least interest has quietly padded up beside you and offered you a piece of fish. And let's not forget the context. In the jungle, danger is never far. Jaguars, snakes, colonizers. The idea of building intimacy wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. Having someone you could trust, someone who shared your hammock and your fire, wasn't just sweet, it was survival. So maybe the tambaqui wasn't magic, but if it brought two people together for a night or a season, maybe that was magic enough. Take a final bite, and as the smoky fish dissolves on your tongue, you notice how your body feels, warm, full, alert, but not frantic. Like you've just remembered what it means to be safe enough to want something, not to chase it, not to trap it, but to hold space for it. Desire as invitation. As welcome dot somewhere deep in the trees, a bird calls out a long, descending note that sounds like a laugh slowly losing its confidence. The drums quiet. The fire crackles one last time, and someone begins to sing. It's not a love song, it's a gratitude song. For the fish, for the night, for the chance to be human without armor, if only for a few hours. The fire is barely a whisper now, a soft orange yawn curling in the dark, but your heartbeat still hums with something ancient. You step away from the clearing, your fingers stained with fish oils and floral ash, and head deeper into the forest because something sweet and musky just brushed your nose. It's not a smell you recognize, not fruit, not flowers. It smells like the memory of someone you once wanted and couldn't have. The kind of scent that makes you close your eyes without knowing why. You follow it like a dream you're not ready to wake up from, pushing past vines that cling like polite hands, and stepping into a grove that feels too quiet to be accidental. This is no ordinary jungle pocket. The ground is carpeted with petals, as if some invisible lover shook out the hem of her skirt and let the flowers fall. You look up, and there it is. The eager tree, or as the locals call it, Mura puama. Its bark is pale and veined like old knuckles. It doesn't tower like the kapok or gleam like the palm, but it radiates a kind of restrained confidence, like someone who knows they're desired, but doesn't have to say it out loud. In legend, its name means potency wood, which is just subtle enough to raise eyebrows without sounding like a gas station supplement. Indigenous tribes use this tree for centuries, grinding its bark, steeping it in warm water, then drinking it before love, after love, and occasionally instead of love. It wasn't just a libido enhancer, it was a mood setter. A tonic to wake the senses, ground the nerves, and invite the body to remember itself. You reach out and touch the bark. It's warm, almost pulsing. And here's the part that stirs the real mystery science is only beginning to catch up. Some studies suggest Mura puama has actual neurological effects. Compounds that stimulate dopamine receptors, enhance blood flow, and reduce anxiety. Others are more skeptical. Historians still argue whether the bark was truly pharmacological, or simply ceremonial, a placebo wrapped in cultural poetry. But maybe that's the wrong question. Because here, under this tree, with the air thick as honey and the moon hanging like a slow wink, you don't care whether it works. You care that it's worked for generations. A story trickles back to you, one that a young guide shared with you over breakfast beans and laughter. Once, a man fell in love with a widow who'd sworn never to marry again. He climbed into the jungle each morning to cut strips of mura puama, brewed it silently, then left a gourd of the potion outside her hut every dusk. No words, no flowers, just bark and belief. After 7 nights, she invited him to share her hammock. After a year, they adopted 2 orphans from the river tribe. The villagers said it was the tree that softened her grief. Or maybe it was just that someone kept showing up. Either way, mura puama earned its place in the love legends. You kneel to inspect the roots, which curl through the soil like lazy snakes, half buried and utterly unbothered. This wasn't a fast tree. It didn't bloom explosively or shed its leaves in drama. It existed with slow insistence, which, come to think of it, is exactly how the best kinds of passion unfold, not in fireworks, but in coals that stay warm long after the spark. Unlike so many modern aphrodisiacs that promise instant fireworks and deliver awkward silence, this bark offered something deeper. Presence. In the erotic spirit through history, Peter Webb reflects on how sensuality has often been bound to slowness. Ancient lovers didn't rush. They steeped, soaked, prepared. And mura puama was part of that slow art taken days before the full moon, often with a faster silence period. It wasn't just about sex. It was about creating space for sex to mean something. An invitation, not a command. But mura puama wasn't gendered. It wasn't for men or for women. It was for anyone who wanted to feel more alive in their body. That inclusivity mattered in cultures where roles weren't always rigid. Here, fluidity existed: gender, desire, partnership. People paired in ways that made sense to them, not to church doctrine or census forms. And if a root or a leaf helped someone feel more confident, more open, more ready to listen with their skin, well, who were the priests to say no? You think about that as you sit beneath the eager tree, the scent of bark and sap rising around you like a sleepy perfume. Your mind drifts, not in chaos, but in memory. Lovers whose names you still remember, and those you forgot too quickly. Moments where your heart leapt, and ones where it locked up. What if desire isn't something you chase, but something you clear a path for? What if aphrodisiacs aren't magic bullets, but gentle shovels, digging away the debris of fear, shame, ego? The jungle hums in agreement. A low insect drone, distant bird calls, leaves rubbing together like 1,000 quiet yeses. You take a folded cloth from your satchel. Inside it, a piece of dried mura puama bark, gifted to you by a healer at the last village. She said to keep it close, not because it would make people fall in love with you, but because it might help you remember to love yourself. That was the real spell. Not seduction, but self-remembering. Not lust, but permission. You tuck the bark behind your ear like a talisman, stand and glance back at the trail. It's darker now. The kind of dark that doesn't wait for your approval. But the path is still there. And so is the scent, soft, musky, confident. You walk on, knowing that somewhere ahead, more secrets are waiting. And none of them, thankfully, will be in a bottle. The jungle narrows again, like it's testing you. Every branch hangs lower, every root juts higher, as if the forest itself is saying, if you want the next secret, you'll have to earn it. You duck under a curtain of lianas, your skin brushing against bark that smells faintly of vanilla and rain. It's quieter here, not in a peaceful way, but in the way that libraries are quiet. You can feel the weight of everything unsaid pressing in. And then you see it, almost by accident, a single blossom in the center of the path, bold as a dare. Its petals are deep crimson, like blood warmed by candlelight, and its center pulses gently in the breeze. This is no ordinary flower. This is the forbidden one, the one they warned you about, the one that's said to shift hearts and tilt loyalties. the perfume of the forbidden flower. You crouch closer, half intrigued, half afraid. The scent drifts toward you before you even lean, in a blend of sweetness and rot, like a love letter found too late. It doesn't just smell good. It smells important. Some plants beg to be noticed. This one waits to be worshipped. In stories passed from grandmother to granddaughter, this flower was used in rituals, not for love, but for loyalty. Women would steep its petals in hot water, let it cool in moonlight, then pour a few drops behind their ears before attending ceremonies. The goal wasn't to seduce, but to protect, bonding their partners, guarding against wandering eyes. Was it superstition? Absolutely. Was it effective? Sometimes terrifyingly so. A tale surfaces, one of those whispered campfire legends told with half-truths and lingering glances. A young healer fell for a hunter who belonged to another. Heartbroken, she gathered the petals, made the brew, and anointed herself with its scent. At the next harvest festival, the hunter found himself drawn to her like a tide pulled by a new moon. They danced. They disappeared. The next day, he left his partner and moved to her village. What happened? Was it magic? Was it chemistry? Historians still argue whether the flower held psychoactive compounds, or whether it was simply the intensity of belief that made it powerful. But in either case, lives changed, lines were crossed. And somewhere, a flower bloomed quietly and watched. You pluck a petal not to use, just to hold. It feels soft, but not delicate, like it knows it's dangerous. This was the Amazon's idea of perfume, not bottled, but alive. Not manufactured, but mythic. In the West, perfumes are about attraction. Here, they were about intention. What were you trying to say? Come closer. Remember me. Don't forget who you promised yourself to. The jungle's flora didn't speak in labels. It whispered in sensations. In Kama Sutra, Vatsyayana writes about the importance of scent in preparing the body for union. Not just as hygiene, but as ritual. The act of anointing oneself, of choosing a fragrance, was part of the seduction. Here, that act was sacred, not flirtatious but focused. To wear the scent of this flower was to declare emotional war, or devotion, depending on your motive. You rise slowly, still holding the petal, and glance up. Above you, dozens of these flowers dangle from vines like tiny red lanterns, flickering in the moonlight. A soft wind stirs them, and the scent deepens. It feels like being enveloped in memory. You imagine walking through a village where every woman has steeped these petals in her washbowl, where every man breathes in the air and walks a little slower, a little more cautiously. Desire is atmosphere. Of course, not every story ends in bliss. One account from a 19th century explorer, written in that tone of colonial condescension that now reads like satire, described a community where jealousy reached epidemic levels, allegedly due to widespread use of the flower. Relationships were fierce. Breakups were rare. One woman was said to have boiled the petals into oil and poured it on her ex's doorstep to anchor his spirit. Whether that worked or just made the place smell amazing is lost to history. But the implication is clear. This was not a casual fragrance. This was a declaration. Wearing it meant something. In a world without Tinder or texting, this was how you said, "I want you to look only at me." Some might call that manipulative. Others might call it clarity. Either way, the flower didn't judge. It simply bloomed, season after season, waiting to be picked or passed by. You tucked the petal into your satchel, half worried it might whisper to your belongings. The path twists again, this time narrowing into a tunnel of green and gold. Sunlight filters through in patches, painting your arms with leopard spots. Somewhere nearby, water trickles. The sound is soft, hypnotic. You follow it, and soon you're at the edge of a pool, so still it reflects the sky like a polished coin. Flowers drift on the surface. Not red ones, these are white, small, delicate. The antidote, perhaps, to the boldness you just encountered. But before you can get poetic, a bee zips by your face, reminding you that even beauty bites. You kneel to sip from a stream feeding the pool, half expecting the water to taste like secrets. It's cold, pure, possibly enchanted. Everything here might be enchanted, but that's the point. In the Amazon, nothing was just what it appeared to be. A flower could be a weapon. A scent could be a promise. A petal might ruin or save a marriage. The forest didn't draw lines between beauty and danger. It wrapped them in the same vine and let you decide. And you, dear wanderer, are now holding pieces of that decision. A petal in your satchel, a memory in your mind, a scent that lingers in your hair like a riddle. You don't know what effect it might have. Maybe none, maybe everything. But tonight, as the sun slides low and the air thickens into evening, you feel noticed, not by people, by the jungle, as if it sees you now not as a guest, but as someone who's learning to listen. The light is starting to go syrup thick, dripping gold through the canopy and catching on the damp edges of every leaf. You walk slower now, not just because the trail has become a tangled mess of roots and shadows, but because something in your bones has shifted. You're no longer looking for the next strange plant or whispered story. You're letting them find you, and that's exactly what happens. One moment, you're ducking under a sagging branch, and the next, you're staring at a cluster of vines coiled together like a sleeping snake, strung with berries so dark they seem to drink the light. You've seen this before, in books, on travel documentaries narrated by cheerful botanists. But here it is in the flesh, or rather in the stem. The vine of souls, ayahuasca. Known for its mind-bending journeys, its spiritual vomiting, its uncanny ability to make grown adults cry at the shape of a leaf. But what most people don't know is that ayahuasca also played a subtle, surreal role in Amazonian seduction. Because here's the twist. In some tribes, the erotic and the divine weren't separate. Desire wasn't just flesh, it was spirit. And sometimes, to want someone was to see them through the eyes of the gods. You crouch beside the vine. Its bark is smooth, a little damp. It smells faintly medicinal, but beneath that, there's something sweeter. A suggestion of memory, or maybe anticipation. You can understand why people believe this plant had a soul of its own. Because it doesn't just sit there. It waits, watching, judging, probably. You imagine a shaman centuries ago, slicing into this vine and mixing it with chacruna leaves, creating a brew not for the faint of heart. Unlike Mura Puama, which warmed the body, or the flower that stirred loyalty, ayahuasca wasn't here to make you feel sexy. It was here to show you everything, including how you love, why you love, and what broken part of you keeps confusing possession with affection. In the history of sexuality, Foucault writes about the technologies of the self, how we shape our identities, desires, and behaviors within the frameworks we're given. Ayahuasca was one of those tools. In some Amazonian societies, couples would drink it together, not to trip together, but to see each other's spirits. To face the shadow stuff, the anger, the past lovers still clinging like ghostly baggage, and sometimes to discover new tendernesses they hadn't known how to express. It wasn't always romantic. Often, it was brutally honest. Imagine looking into someone's eyes and seeing their worst regrets painted across their skin like war paint. Imagine being seen that way yourself. A story floats up from the vines, the kind that feels too strange to be real and too detailed not to be. Two young lovers, barely adults, were allowed by their village to drink ayahuasca together as a rite of partnership. They lay side by side in a ceremonial hut, drinking from the same gourd, their fingers touching but not holding. What they saw, they never told anyone. But the next morning, they emerged changed. Not married, not broken, just quiet. A year later, they lived in separate huts but spent every night together. No one questioned it. The jungle had approved. You run your fingers along the vine's surface, feeling for a pulse. There's none, of course, but the forest around you seems to hush in recognition. Because this isn't just about plants anymore. It's about what the plants represent. A worldview where intimacy is layered. Where sex is not the goal, but one brushstroke on a much larger canvas. Where the body is a doorway, not a destination. Anthropologists have long debated ayahuasca's role in courtship and community bonding. Some dismissed its romantic significance, focusing only on its visionary use. Others insisted that in certain regions, drinking it was part of couple formation, especially when elders wanted to test the strength of a union. See each other. They'd say truly. And in those visions, people sometimes met their partner as an animal, a bird, a shadow, or a burning fire. Strange, yes, but also strangely accurate. Love rarely shows up in a tidy human shape. You take a deep breath. The air smells like moss and electricity. Somewhere above, a howler monkey calls out, a sound halfway between a bark and a choir warming up. You look up, half expecting the vines to move. But they don't. They just exist. Unapologetically complex. Like people. Like desire. You think. Back to the times you've fallen in love or thought you had. The moments that felt cosmic. As if the universe had opened a tiny door just for you. Maybe that's what ayahuasca did. Turned those doors into mirrors. Held them up until you had no choice but to see the cracks. But this isn't about guilt or shame. The Amazon doesn't do shame. It does transformation. And in that, ayahuasca was considered a matchmaker of the soul. Not by pushing people together, but by stripping away what didn't serve. Some couples broke apart after drinking it. Others grew closer, no longer clinging, but choosing each other again, day after day, in full knowledge of the weird, messy, glowing truth. You lean against the vine and close your eyes, letting the jungle sounds wash over you. The buzz of insects, the rustle of something four-legged nearby, the distant cough of a bird with performance anxiety. And underneath it all, the pulse of the forest, the slow heartbeat of a place that has known love in all its forms. Wild, desperate, generous, divine. When you open your eyes again, the shadows have stretched long and lean. The vine seems to shimmer for a moment, just a flicker, and you wonder if maybe, just maybe, it showed you something too. Not a vision, not a prophecy, but a memory, yours, someone you loved and lost, or loved and let go. And somehow, that, too, is part of the jungle's aphrodisiac. Not just to stir the body, but to remind the heart that it still knows how to ache. And in that ache, to hope. Just when you think the jungle has shown you all its cards, bark that boils desire, flowers that trap memory, vines that strip your soul naked, it throws you something small, something so easy to overlook that it feels like a prank. You spot them near the edge of a swampy bend in the trail, crawling over each other like gossip at a village market. Ants. Not the fire-breathing kind or the army. Ant battalions you've read about. These are tiny, almost dainty, with an iridescent shimmer to their bodies that makes them look like they've been dipped in moonlight. And yet, these little creatures, these humble forest footnotes, carry one of the strangest love legends in all of Amazonian lore. They are the libido ants. Or, as one shaman called them, the ants that make your heart forget its manners. You crouch watching them move in perfect rhythm, their line unbroken, their mission unknown to all but them. And here's the kicker. Some tribes believed that letting one of these ants bite you, just a quick nip on the skin, could stimulate feelings of attraction so intense, so irrational, that the bitten party might do or say something unwise, romantic, yes, smart, debatable, but undeniably real in the stories. You picture a love-struck young man pacing outside a hut, arms still tingling from the bite, reciting poetry to a woman who'd previously ignored him for 3 moons. Did the ant make him bold, or did it just strip away his fear? One story tells of a hunter who returned from the forest not with game, but with a bite on his neck and a sudden obsession with the village potter, a woman 20 years his senior, notorious for throwing cups at anyone who flirted with her. 3 weeks later, they were living together. No one knew what she saw in him. No one knew what he saw in her. But everyone agreed. The ant had picked a side. You scoot a little closer, staring at one ant in particular, watching as it climbs a blade of grass, pauses like it's considering a life choice, then continues upward. There's something eerie about their confidence. You've read the studies. Scientists speculate that certain ants in the region secrete mild alkaloids when threatened, which might cause tingling, increased circulation, maybe even a slight adrenaline rush. Combine that with a human nervous system already tuned to the frequencies of ritual and myth, and suddenly a bite becomes a message. Historians still argue whether the ant's effect was pharmacological or psychosomatic. Was it the chemical compound, or was it the story around the bite that made it potent? But here's the part no one disputes. The ants were used with care. You didn't just go around letting them nibble you for fun. They were part of ceremonies, woven into dances, painted into body art. Some tribes inked tiny ant patterns around the wrists or collarbone during initiation rites. Others placed the ants in small gourds during matchmaking rituals, shaking them gently while the couple exchanged gifts, like some deranged maraca of destiny. You think about the modern equivalents. Dating profiles, first date jitters, elaborate grooming routines. And here, a bug did the heavy lifting. A single bite, and your filters fell away. Not all of them, maybe, but enough to say what you meant. Ask what you feared, laugh too loudly, or dance too badly. And maybe that was the point. The jungle doesn't seduce with sophistication. It seduces with honesty. Sweaty, awkward, bite-sized honesty. You glance at your arm. Part of you wants to test the theory, just a quick pinch. See if it unlocks something. But another part of you, the one that remembers the time you texted an ex at 2 a.m., isn't quite ready for that kind of vulnerability. You watch the ants scurry on, disappearing into the underbrush like they have better things to do than meddle in your romantic life. Still, you feel oddly grateful. Because in a world obsessed with grand gestures, it's comforting to know that even a creature smaller than your fingernail can carry the spark of boldness. In Sex with Kings, Eleanor Herman talks about how European rulers used aphrodisiacs like perfume-drenched gloves and fortified wines to gain romantic or political advantage. They needed theater, props, layers of seduction. But here, the jungle gave you an ant. And if that ant bit you, and you suddenly confessed your love, no one blamed the wine. They blamed the truth. That's what these rituals and creatures were. For not to invent desire, but to excavate it. To scrape away doubt and make room for the thing you'd been too scared to say. You stand slowly, brushing your hands on your thighs, the image of the ant still crawling behind your eyes. Around you, the forest seems to hum with private laughter, as if it knows you're beginning to understand that love here doesn't need poetry. It needs presence. And maybe the courage to let something small sting you into honesty. As you move forward, the trees open slightly, revealing a sun-dappled stretch of trail that glows gold and green. You breathe in the thick, damp air, still laced with that faint musky perfume from earlier, and wonder how many tiny things have shaped human history without ever making it into textbooks. Ants, leaves, barks, bruise, petals. They don't scream. They're stories. They whisper them. And if you listen closely, closer than science, closer than gossip, you might just catch the echo of a truth that still stings. You don't notice the tattoos at first. You're too distracted by the heat, by the way the jungle swells with every breath you take, by the trail turning to mud underfoot like it's trying to pull you back into the earth. But then the light shifts just slightly, and suddenly, there they are. Shapes, symbols, silent languages etched into bark-colored skin. They're not decorative, they're declarations. Across shoulders, around waists, coiled down arms, and stretching over ribs, these tattoos speak the way leaves rustle secrets when no one's watching. They were never meant for your eyes, but the jungle lets you see them anyway. In many Amazonian cultures, body art wasn't just for beauty. It was function. It was flirtation. It was memory. And when it came to sex, desire, attraction, these symbols told stories long before words showed up. You approach a clearing where a group is gathered, not in ritual, not in feast, but in preparation. Someone's heating a stick over a fire. Another grinds dark ash from burned wood and crushed berries into a fine powder. A girl not more than 18 sits cross-legged and bare-chested, calm as a summer pond. An older woman kneels beside her and, without a word, presses the heated stick to the girl's thigh. There's a hiss, a curl of smoke, a wince, but no scream. When the skin lifts, the ash is applied, sealing the mark. Not a picture, a pattern, a message. This particular design is for readiness, not in the biological sense, but in the social one. It says, I have passed the threshold. I know who I am. I know what I want. It's not about being available. It's about being a line dot in this part of the Amazon. Tattoos mark emotional readiness as much as maturity. You didn't just wear them to attract a partner. You wore them to say, I've done the inner work. Kind of puts swiping left into perspective, doesn't it? These symbols, sometimes based on animal tracks, sometimes celestial arrangements, were often coded. Outsiders wouldn't know what they meant, but your community would, and your desired one would. A particular curve might mean seeking softness. A dot near the collarbone might suggest interested in partnership, not conquest. There were even designs for heartbreak worn, not with shame, but with clarity. Like a leaf that falls not because it's failed, but because it's done its job. And then there were the sweat rituals. You first hear the singing before you understand. What it's for, a slow, looping hum that drifts through the trees like incense. You follow it, of course. You always do. You come upon a structure half dug into the earth, ringed by stones and draped in broad leaves. A sweat lodge. But not the kind you've seen in tourist brochures. This one pulses with steam and memory. Inside, bodies sit close, cross-legged, pressed together not by space, but by intention. The air inside smells of bark, citrus, earth, and salt. Each person bears at least one tattoo. Most have more. Their skin shines with heat. They don't speak. They breathe in unison, letting the steam loosen not just their pores, but their burdens. You're told these lodges were where partners sometimes met, not by talking, not by comparing. Likes and dislikes, but by being, by sweating side by side, by surrendering to the same heat. The tattoo on your arm might say, looking, but it was the sweat that said ready. The idea was simple and utterly profound, if you could sit. Through the discomfort of heat, of silence, of self, with someone beside you. Maybe you could sit through anything else too. Not exactly a meet cute, but definitely a meet-true dot in the erotic spirit through history. Peter Webb describes the sacred nature of preparing the body for love. Not just washing or dressing, but transforming. These tattoos and rituals weren't adornments, they were invitations. A slow unfolding. And unlike modern symbols of attraction, tight dresses, expensive colognes, these marks were permanent. You wore them through storms, through seasons, through shifts in who you thought you were. They weren't there to impress. They were there to inform. A story surfaces from the sweat. A woman who had her heart broken 3 times in a row decided to tattoo a snake across her stomach, not as warning, but as reclamation. She believed the snake represented her new understanding, desire that slithers, that sheds, that survives. Months later, she entered a sweat lodge with her future partner. He saw the tattoo, nodded, and said, I carry a jaguar on my back. I think we should speak. They sat together through 4 rounds of steam. They emerged not in love, but in alignment. Love came later, possibly over fish. Historians still argue whether these tattoos had erotic purposes or broader spiritual meanings. The likely answer? Both. The Amazon didn't draw a line between body and spirit, between pleasure and purpose. You wore your truth. And when the moment came to share that truth, it wasn't about performance. It was about resonance. Do our marks align? Do our stories rhyme? Are we both willing to sweat through this together? You're offered a seat inside the lodge. The steam greets you like an old friend who remembers everything you never said. Your lungs work harder. Your heart slows. You sit in silence, surrounded by symbols, by strangers who are not so strange anymore. You don't speak. You don't need to. The heat does it for you, melting away your masks, leaving only what's honest. Later, as you step back into the open. Air, your skin is damp, your shirt clings, and your fingers shake just slightly. Not from fear, from release. From the soft exhale that comes when you've let yourself be seen, without mirrors, without polish, without pretense. And the tattoos? They don't glow, they don't shimmer, but they stay. As they always have. Etched into skin, into story, into the living memory of a jungle that doesn't just help you find someone. It helps you find yourself. The air smells different, now thicker, more electric, like the forest is holding its breath. You notice it before you even see the clearing ahead, before you hear the rustle that isn't wind and the low growl that isn't thunder. It's as if every leaf is leaning in, every bird has hushed mid-call, because you're about to enter sacred territory. And when you finally step through the underbrush and into the wide circular glade, your skin prickles, not with fear, but with the strange recognition that you are being watched by something older than time and completely indifferent to whether or not you believe in it. Welcome to the domain of the jaguar god. In the myths of many Amazonian tribes, the jaguar wasn't just a predator, it was a lover, a teacher, a shapeshifter who moved between worlds. Sometimes male, sometimes female, sometimes both. The jaguar god represented wild, untamed desire, the kind that didn't ask for permission and didn't wait for you to be ready. They seduced mortals not with charm or romance, but with presence. You didn't fall for the jaguar, you were devoured by it. And strangely, that was the goal. A particularly haunting tale is told among the Ticuna people. A woman bathing in the river saw a jaguar watching her from the trees. She did not scream. She did not run. That night, she dreamed of him, a man with golden eyes and a voice like SLOW thunder. He came to her every night after that, in dreams that left her skin warm and her heart unsettled. Soon, she was pregnant. The villagers whispered. They said it wasn't possible. But when her child was born, his eyes gleamed with the same impossible gold. The child grew strong, quiet, and by the age of 10, could call animals with a whistle. They called him Son of the Forest. He lived at the edge of the village, neither fully man nor myth. Some said he was proof, others a warning. But everyone agreed. Desire had teeth. You walk through the clearing slowly, aware that your every step is being registered. The trees lean in closer here, vines hang lower, and the patterns on the bark resemble claw marks, though whether that's natural or intentional is unclear. This was where couples came to test their connection, not in front of elders, but in front of the unseen. To declare affection here was risky. The jaguar god didn't like falsehoods. If you entered this space with doubt in your heart, you might leave alone, or not at all. But if you were sincere, if your longing was honest, the jungle blessed. You dot in some variations of the myth. The jaguar was a woman who roamed the forest looking for lonely men. She would appear by the river, brush her hair with a comb made of fish bones, and offer no words, only a glance. If the man accepted her, Gaze, she would lead him into the trees and teach him how to move like water, how to listen like moss. Sometimes he returned. Sometimes he didn't. Either way, he was changed. Not broken, not cursed. Just altered. More animal. More awake. Anthropologists have wrestled with these stories, unsure whether to categorize them as erotic folklore, spiritual allegory, or suppressed memory. Historians still argue whether these jaguar encounters were metaphorical initiations or veiled records of ancient rites. But for the people who lived them, who passed them down, the distinction didn't matter. The jaguar god was real. Not because you could photograph it, but because you could feel it. In the sweat on your back. In the dream you couldn't forget. In the way your body responded to someone who looked at you like they'd swallowed the moon. You find a flat rock in the middle of the clearing and sit. The moss is cool. The silence here is complete, not empty, but pregnant. You can almost hear the slow exhale of the trees, as if they're remembering something you haven't lived. Yet, you close your eyes. And that's when the dream begins. You see yourself not as you are, but as you wish to be. Stronger, softer, more open. You're not alone. A figure moves beside you, eyes like gold, smile like wind through dry grass. They don't speak. They don't need to. They circle you once, twice, and with each pass, something falls away. A fear, a regret, a mask you didn't know you were wearing, and then they're gone. Not with drama. Just gone. And in their place, silence. Peaceful. Honest. Whole. You open your eyes slowly, the vision fading but the feeling lingering like smoke on your skin. The forest hasn't changed, but you have. You stand lighter somehow. Less full of questions. More full of breath. You understand now why the jaguar god was a lover to some, a threat to others. Because desire that doesn't ask for permission can either set you free or reveal how deeply caged you are. And the jungle never lies in the erotic spirit through history. Peter Webb writes about the fusion of animal power and human longing, how cultures across time have equated wildness with vitality. Here, that concept isn't theoretical. It's flesh and blood, claw and kiss. The jaguar doesn't seduce with words. It seduces with stillness, with knowing, with the certainty that to love without fear is the most dangerous, most divine thing a person can do. You step out of the clearing, leaving no trace but your breath. The trees part slightly, as if saying goodbye, or good luck. And as you continue walking, heart steady, feet sure, you realize you are no longer just a visitor in the jungle. You are a witness to power, to myth, to the kind of desire that doesn't whisper sweet nothings. It roars softly and waits to see who answers. You don't hear the drums at first, you feel them. A soft thudding beneath your feet, like the heartbeat of something enormous waking slowly underground. Then the air shifts. Not colder, not warmer, just fuller. As if the wind has texture now, as if every molecule carries a message and it's all pointed at you. You follow it, of course, because at this point, you're not in control of this journey. The jungle has taken your hand and is leading you deeper. Deeper into something bright and primal and very, very alive. That's when you see the glow. Orange and flickering, like the sky has fallen into the trees and decided to dance. You push through the final curtain of vines and step into a space unlike anything you've seen so far. Fire, dancers, shadows on skin, laughter that sounds too wild to be rehearsed. You've arrived at the sacred fire dance. It doesn't look sacred. Not at first. It looks like chaos. People with painted faces, and bodies oiled in something that catches the firelight like rain on bronze. They move in spirals, in pulses, in slow, deliberate explosions. No choreography, and yet no one collides. This isn't performance. This is pulse made visible. You feel it instantly in your own body, the urge to sway, to mirror, to abandon the Heavy weight of thought and drop into rhythm. And that's exactly the point, because this dance isn't for show. It's an invocation, a flirtation with the divine, a ritual where the flames don't just warm the night, they seduce it. In many Amazonian cultures, the fire dance wasn't a celebration after love, it was foreplay. Community foreplay, in the least creepy sense of the phrase. The idea was simple. Move together until the ego falls away, until your body speaks louder than your mind, until you recognize yourself not as a separate creature, but as one drumbeat in a vast, ecstatic rhythm. Partners didn't emerge from polite conversation. They emerged from resonance. From the moment two bodies, moving in the same beat, realized they were already halfway to union. You take a seat near the edge of the circle, the ground warm beneath. You from the fire's reach. A man with green feathers woven into his hair catches your eye and smiles, not a flirty smile, but a knowing one. As if to say, yeah, it gets under your skin, doesn't it? And it does, because the drumbeat is no longer just in your ears. It's in your ribs, your knees, the tips of your fingers. You watch a woman dip a gourd into a pot of fermented fruit and pass it to her dance partner. They drink, one after the other, their foreheads touching. It's a gesture of intimacy, but not ownership. There's no grasping here, no bargaining. Just offering. The drink, you're told, is made from pequi and wild cacao, sometimes laced with subtle stimulants. Not to intoxicate, but to open, to soften, to make the body a little more willing to listen to itself. Some believe it heightens touch, prolongs sensation, blurs the line between self and other. Others say it just makes you a better dancer. Historians still argue whether these fire dances were pre-mating rituals or sacred celebrations of fertility. Seasons, but the people dancing don't argue. They don't need to. They know what their bodies are saying. And they trust that the jungle is listening. A story drifts toward you through the music. An elder once told of two rival hunters who fell in love during the fire dance. For years they had competed over prey, over reputation, over pride. But one night, they danced opposite each other, the fire between them, and something shifted. Their movements stopped clashing. They began to echo. Step for step, spin for spin, until the line between rivalry and attraction dissolved like ash. The village accepted them the next morning without ceremony. Because the fire had already spoken. You look again at the dancers. No one here is chasing anyone. They're circling, orbiting, sharing gravity. The ones who find each other do so not by grasping, but by matching. There's a woman with scars on her back and a man with a missing finger dancing, like they've always known this language. There's an elder, at least 70, whose hips move with such reverence it makes your chest ache. There are young ones, tentative but brave, dipping their toes into the rhythm like it might baptize them. And maybe it does. In Kama Sutra, there's an entire section devoted not to positions, but to atmosphere, to the role of music, scent, touch, and gaze in creating a space where love can happen. That's what this dance is, a container. A temple made of smoke and sweat where people remember what it means to feel seen. Not judged, not pursued, just witnessed. Just met. You take a sip from the gourd passed to you. It tastes of fruit left too long in the sun, of bark and honey, and something that makes your lips tingle. You feel your chest open. Not dramatically, not romantically, just willingly. You begin to sway. Not to dance, not yet, but to let your body know that you hear. The rhythm too. That you're listening, that you're available. Not for a partner, but for presence. For the moment when movement becomes meaning. The fire spits sparks into the sky like constellations reborn. Someone near you hums a low note that seems to vibrate your spine. You realize this is no performance. This is ceremony, the kind that doesn't need a priest or a pulpit. Just bare feet, brave hearts, and a beat that goes on long after the flames die down. And in that heat, that glow, that endless spiral of motion, you begin to understand. This is the aphrodisiac. Not a potion, not a flower, but the feeling of belonging inside your body again. The slow return to the rhythm you were born with. And the gentle, wordless invitation to share that rhythm with someone else. Not as proof, not as promise, but as presence. The fire dance lingers in your bones like the memory of a dream you're not quite ready to wake from. Your muscles hum with a warmth that isn't fatigue, it's something deeper. Gratitude, maybe. Or the quiet thrill of having glimpsed a different version of yourself. You walk away slowly, not because you're tired, but because leaving such a space feels like exiting a story that was written just for you. The jungle doesn't applaud. It simply closes the trees behind you, the way a book folds shut after its final page. But it's not done with you yet. Not even close. The path ahead darkens again, and the air cools. You can hear the soft swish of water nearby. A stream, perhaps, winding lazily like a snake with nowhere to be. And then you see them bushes with waxy leaves and tiny pale blossoms, huddled together like they're keeping secrets. You've arrived at a place rarely discussed, even among those who study these lands. You've found the virginity herb. No. One agrees on its real name. That's part of the mystery. Some call it leaf of the moon, others whisper root. In a few oral traditions, it's simply the silence plant. What's consistent, though, is its legend. Women, usually young but sometimes older, would brew its leaves into a tea and drink it before festivals or rites of passage. Some believed it preserved virginity. Others said it cloaked desire. A few claimed it made the drinker invisible to lustful spirits. But most agreed on one thing. It was a choice, not a requirement, not a punishment. A decision made in private, sometimes whispered between sisters, sometimes guided by grandmothers who'd long since stopped explaining themselves to anyone. You crouch beside the plant. It doesn't look magical. It looks unassuming, as if it doesn't want attention. The leaves are matte green, with edges just sharp enough to suggest they've seen things. When you pinch one between your fingers, it releases a faint scent, bitter, woody, with a shadow of sweetness underneath. The kind of smell that makes you think of promises kept in locked drawers. You imagine the ritual, a quiet hut, a clay bowl, a girl sitting cross-legged, steam curling up into her face as she sips. Not with fear, not with shame, but with intention, to pause, to wait, to decide for herself when the next page should turn. Historians still argue whether the virginity herb had any physiological effect. Some insist it acted as a mild sedative, calming nerves before ceremonial events. Others believe it tightened muscle groups in subtle ways, creating a sensation of preservation that fed the myth. And of course, some dismiss it entirely, labeling it folklore, misinterpreted pharmacology, placebo wrapped in patriarchy. But here's what they miss. Even if the herb didn't do what people claimed, it still did something. It gave agency. It gave girls a ritual that was theirs. A tool not of control, but of clarity. There's a tale passed through one riverside community of a girl named Mayra who drank the tea every full moon from the age of 13. Not because anyone made her, not because she feared men or shame or judgment, but because she believed the plant gave her dreams. Vivid, detailed, strange dreams in which her future self spoke to her through symbols. An owl carrying fire, a broken comb, a canoe with no paddle. She took these as guidance, letting them shape her sense of timing. When she finally chose a partner, she stopped drinking the tea. Not because she was ready in the way the world defines it, but because she no longer needed the dreams. Her story had begun. You run your fingers over another leaf. It's cool, smooth, slightly sticky. You imagine bottling this scent, this essence, and wonder what you'd call it. Not purity. That word's too loaded, too sharp. Maybe pause or sovereignty. Something that means mine, not yours. That's the part that most modern narratives miss. They frame virginity as a gate someone else either guards or breaches. But here, in this quiet grove, it's a garden you tend yourself, open or closed, blooming or fallow, but always yours. And the herb didn't only belong to women. In some communities, boys were also given a version, sometimes a tea, sometimes a smoke to help them focus during their own initiations. It wasn't about denial, it was about delay. About learning to sit with want without turning it into demand. About recognizing that desire can be powerful and still patient. That waiting isn't weakness, it's a different kind of strength. In the history of sexuality, Foucault discusses how societies shape narratives around abstinence and control, often ignoring the agency of the individuals involved. But here, in the shadow of the forest, the choice to abstain wasn't imposed, it was celebrated. Not with medals or sermons, but with understanding. No one asked, "Why aren't you ready?" They asked, "What are you listening for?" A rustle behind you draws your attention. A woman steps out from the trees, older, strong, with hair like braided silver rope and eyes that seem to have outlived fire. She doesn't speak. She simply nods, kneels beside the herb, and begins to gather a few leaves with careful fingers. Her gestures are slow, deliberate, reverent. You don't interrupt. You don't need to. In that moment, you understand. This is not a place of confession. It's a place of reflection. You rise, brush your hands against your thighs, and step away from the grove. The air shifts again, warmer now, touched with the scent of something blooming. You think about how often the world rushes us toward experience, framing patience as hesitation, silence as lack. But here, in this green hush, you've tasted a different truth. That sometimes the most seductive power is the ability to say, "Not yet," and to mean it. As you walk, the path curls gently, like a question mark leading you onward. You carry no leaves, no tokens, no proof, just a feeling. A sense of space inside yourself that hasn't been filled, but honored. The virginity herb doesn't make you pure. It makes you aware. And in a world that constantly demands answers, maybe awareness is the most radical kind of aphrodisiac there is. The path narrows again, coiling like a question you're not sure you want the answer to. Leaves slap gently at your arms as if trying to get your attention, but they don't sting. They're soft, fragrant, coated in dew that smells faintly of spice and something darker like burned sugar or very old secrets. The scent thickens. As you walk, it seeps into your hair, your skin, the fabric of your shirt. Soon, it's everywhere. And that's when you see them, shallow bowls carved from gourd, arranged in a loose spiral along the trail, each one holding a different mixture. Some bubble softly, some are still. Some glisten with oil so dark it swallows the firelight filtering through the trees. You've stumbled into a preparation ground, the jungle's version of a vanity table, and what you're looking at isn't perfume, it's potion. Or depending on who you ask, poison. Welcome to the strange world of snake oil and lip paint. No two batches are the same, and no one gives you a recipe. This isn't something you make from instruction. It's something you feel your way into. A little oil from the belly of a serpent. A pinch of powdered root. The juice of a berry that stains like blood and smells like flowers mourning their own death. The women who mix these don't smile as they stir. They don't joke. This isn't play, it's preparation. And it's serious business, because this isn't just about attraction. It's about influence, control, the quiet power of walking into a room and knowing the wind shifts with you. Bowl contains a thick, oily mixture the color of overripe cherries. This, you're told, is lip courage. Worn before a confession, or a confrontation, or a seduction that walks the line between hope and war. Its base is made from annatto, seeds, the same that lend color to ceremonial paints, but mixed with a resin secreted by a tree only found on the north bend of the river. Supposedly, when worn on the mouth, it makes every word seem more true, even the lies, especially the lies. A young woman once used it to tell 3 different men that she loved them. 2 believed her. 1 married her. She later claimed she didn't. Regret the potion, only the truth had forced her to speak. Then there's the infamous serpent blend. Snake oil in the most literal sense. Made from the fat of small jungle vipers and rumored to be the most potent of all the amorous preparations. Not because it made you desirable, but because it made you undeniable. You'd smell it before you saw it. A bitter, acrid tang layered with something that feels like danger flirting with comfort. Men and women both used it, often before dances or negotiations or declarations of intent. It was risky, not because of toxicity, but because of its effect. Some said it made people bold. Others said it made people reckless. A healer once described it like this: it makes your heart louder than your head. Which, if we're honest, is a pretty accurate definition of lust. You run your finger near the rim of one of the bowls and feel a tingle, like static or anticipation. No one stops you, they just watch. Because here, the act of choosing a mixture says as much about you as the potion itself. Some choose the lip paint to whisper. Some choose the snake oil to command. Some mix both and hope they cancel each other out. But the jungle isn't a chemistry lab, it's a mirror. What you bring to the potion is what it brings to you. In Sex with Kings, Eleanor Herman recounts how royal courtesans and mistresses across Europe used mixtures of perfume and tincture not just to seduce, but to influence decisions of state. A drop behind the ear could be the difference between peace and war. Here, in the rainforest, the stakes were different, but the power was real. These mixtures weren't ornamental. They were tactical. You didn't wear them to be pretty. You wore them to be remembered, or feared, or forgiven. You're handed a small vial by one of the women. It's sealed with wax and tied with a strand of hair. You're told it's for truth spoken under starlight. No one tells you what's inside. You're not meant to open it now. You're meant to carry it until the night demands it. That's how these things work. The jungle doesn't give you a user manual. It gives you responsibility. And then it watches. There's a story you remember, whispered by a guide back at the last village stop. A woman once brewed a variation of the serpent oil so potent that when she wore it, every man who passed her hut stood outside, silently, for 3 nights. Not knocking, not calling her name, just standing. She opened the door for one. He stepped in. She never wore it again. No one asked why. But the vines on her doorway were found twisted into a new shape the next morning, one that, in her community, meant desire, fulfilled and finished. Historians still argue whether these recipes had any scientific merit. Some claim mild, psychoactive effects. Others point to pheromonal compounds found in animal fat and fermented fruits. But the truth is slipperier. Because even if there was no chemistry, there was alchemy. Belief, ritual, intention. And in the Amazon, intention is everything. You don't stir oil and root and paint because you want to manipulate someone. You do it because you're preparing for the possibility that you might finally say what you mean. And the risk that they might believe you. You rise, the scent still clinging to your skin like a secret you haven't decided whether to tell. The women return to their mixing. They're singing low and steady, like a spell being kneaded into the air. You step carefully between the bowls, respectful, reverent. And as you leave, you realize your lips are tingling. Not from contact, from memory. From the idea that somewhere in the folds of this jungle, someone once spoke their heart aloud and was heard. The air outside the preparation ground is cool and damp, laced with a scent you can't quite place, sweet, sharp, a little sad. It stays with you, even as the trees close in again. A reminder that words have power, but sometimes it's the silence before them, the pause, the preparation, the painted promise that carries the real spell. You smell it before you see it, sharp, peppery, with a kind of electric sweetness that makes your nostrils flare without permission. It cuts through the humidity like a blade through silk, and the effect is instant. Your pulse quickens, your skin tightens, your mouth goes dry in the most confusingly pleasant way. You follow it, nose first, heart second, logic last. The jungle seems to part willingly this time, like it knows what you're looking for and is both amused and slightly concerned. And then there it is, sitting on a leaf like royalty, waiting to be served. A beetle, small, glossy, and red as sin. You've just met the aphrodisiac that buzzed through entire myths and nearly got itself banned from history. The infamous love beetle. In some parts of the Amazon, it's called fogo do corpo, fire of the body. In others, simply, the whisper beetle, because once it touches your skin, you supposedly hear things you don't want to admit out loud. It's not the kind of creature you'd expect to carry the weight of desire. It doesn't glow. It doesn't bite. It doesn't even move much. It just sits there, radiating a scent that doesn't seduce so much as it challenges. Like it's daring you to touch it. In fact, that's exactly how most stories begin, with a touch. You kneel, careful not to disturb the beetle, and watch it twitch its antennae like it's tuning into your thoughts. The sap oozing from its joints glistens in the sunlight, and someone nearby whispers, "Don't lick your fingers." You don't laugh, because they're not joking. The oils from this beetle have been used for centuries, diluted, distilled, or dangerously raw to stir arousal, amplify sensation, or induce the kind of emotional vulnerability that makes you confess things you've hidden even from yourself. And here's the dangerous beauty of it. It works too well. Sometimes the compound in question, likely cantharidin, or something close to it, acts as an irritant, stimulating blood flow and nerve sensitivity. It was used in tiny amounts, almost ritualistically. A drop on the inner wrist, a smear behind the knee. In controlled doses, it was said to make lovers more receptive, more daring. In uncontrolled doses, it could cause blistering, nausea, hallucinations. That's why it was handled only by those who knew its moods. The jungle didn't hand out power without price. A healer nearby tells you a tale. Once, a man sought to win the affection of a widow who had lost 2 husbands, one to snakebite, one to boredom. He crushed a beetle into powder, mixed it with the sap of a night-blooming flower, and slipped it into a ceremonial drink. She laughed more that night than anyone had ever seen. She kissed him before the drums stopped. They lived together for 10 years, until she grew bored again. When she left, she took the beetle powder with her. Some say she started her own apothecary. Others say she disappeared into the jungle, laughing. Either way, no one blamed the beetle. Only the man who forgot that desire isn't ownership. You ask if people still use it. The healer shrugs. Sometimes, carefully, with the right prayers. Because here, nothing is used in isolation. No herb, no oil, no beetle acts alone. They are always part of a ritual, a rhythm, a story. To use the beetle without context is to wear a crown made of flame beautiful. Yes, but ruinous if you forget, it's fire. There's even a local saying, the beetle doesn't love you. It only reminds you how badly you want to be loved. It's not about creating desire. It's about amplifying what's already there. And that's the danger. That's the hook. Because sometimes what's already there is longing. But sometimes it's loneliness, or obsession, or a secret you hoped would never speak. Historians still argue whether beetle-based aphrodisiacs were rooted in science or fear. Some records describe their use in fertility rites and romantic initiation ceremonies. Others point to darker chapters, poisonings, manipulations, love gone wrong. The European conquistadors who witnessed such practices were both horrified and fascinated, smuggling crushed beetle resin back to their courts and mixing it with wine, then blaming their sudden irrational crushes on jungle madness. They called it exotic. The locals called it foolish. In the erotic spirit through history, Peter Webb reflects on how power and mystery intertwine in sensual rituals. The beetle embodies both. A tiny thing that can tip the balance of a night, or a heart, or a history. And unlike herbs or flowers, which you can plant and predict, beetles move on their own. They vanish when they're done. Like feelings you thought you'd buried. You watch as the beetle finally shifts and begins its slow crawl toward the edge of the leaf. You don't touch it. You don't need to. Just being this close, breathing the air it colors, is enough to stir something, not lust, not exactly, more like memory. Of nights you felt a little too alive. Of glances you held a second too long. Of the terrifying beauty of wanting and being wanted in equal measure. You step back, letting the beetle claim its stage. The healer grins at you, not smug, just knowing. Now you understand, they say, and you do. Because the jungle doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. And sometimes that whisper is carried on 6 tiny legs, wearing a perfume that reminds you desire is never polite. It's patient. It's dangerous. And sometimes it's red and glistening and watching you from a leaf. You leave the grove in silence. No drums, no chants. Just the distant sound of water and the rustling of leaves rearranging themselves. You wonder how many people have walked this path before you, tempted by a beetle, changed by a scent, ruined or redeemed by a drop of something too strong to measure. And you know, in your bones, that the jungle doesn't judge. It simply offers. And then it watches what you do next. The air changes again, subtle, but undeniable. Less earthy, more civilized. Less vine, more parchment. It's a shift you feel in your shoulders before you see it with your eyes. The way a room falls silent just before a secret is told. The jungle hasn't disappeared. It's still humming beneath your feet, still cradling you in its humid, leafy grip. But now another presence has joined it. One with books instead of songs, ink instead of ash, and a gaze that scans records, files away. You've arrived at the moment history began to wear shoes and carry notebooks. This is the beginning of colonial intrusion, and with it, the theft of a Phrodisacs. It's almost quiet here. Not natural quiet, curated quiet. A hush that smells like pressed linen, old wood, and the residue of boiled ink. The Jesuits were here, the missionaries. The men with crosses and sharp questions, and the kind of faces that flinch at nakedness, but lean in hard when someone mentions sacred plants. They came to convert, yes, but they also came to collect stories, recipes, specimens. And when they couldn't carry something out in a bag, they carried it out in a notebook, disguised as observation. You walk through what used to be a village. Now it's little more than patterns in the dirt, a few crumbling stones, some persistent herbs growing in the shape of old garden beds. But if you squint, really squint, you can see the outlines of what once was a central fire pit, a hut used for preparation, a shaded grove where lovers might have shared a stolen gourd of something spicy and intention-laced. These people had aphrodisiacs not to titillate, but to connect, to heal, to soften grief, to stir memory. And the colonizers, with their books and their baggage, misunderstood it all. In one corner, you find the remains of what might have been a workshop. Low stone shelves, burned marks from pottery fires. And tucked beneath a slab of rock, a broken shard of ceramic still stained with something dark reddish-brown. It smells faintly familiar: cacao, guarana, something more intimate. The jungle won't tell you, but the missionaries would have written it down. In tidy Latin probably, with annotations in the margins like used in ritual of questionable purity. That's how it went. They arrived with an agenda, and anything that didn't fit, especially rituals involving desire, bodily autonomy, or women making their own medicine, was labeled sinful or suspicious or erased entirely. a particular Jesuit, named Father Gasper, once wrote about the women of the forest who wore perfumes not to please their husbands, but to lead men into temptation. He sounded concerned, but he wrote over 20 pages describing those perfumes, their ingredients, their preparation, their rumored effects. He wasn't just condemning them, he was archiving them, studying them, packaging them for an audience who would never smell them firsthand but would believe every word he wrote. Some of these stolen formulas made it back to Europe. Disguised as tropical tonics or oriental elixirs, they were sold in apothecaries and perfumeries to noble women and bored courtiers. None of them knew where the ingredients came from. Few of them cared. They weren't buying heritage, they were buying novelty. And in doing so, they divorced the plant from the place, the ritual from the relationship. What had once been sacred became exotic. What had once been a whisper between two bodies became a product with a price tag. You sit on one of the stone shelves, running your fingers over the grooves left by time and rain. You imagine a young girl grinding seeds here, not for profit or manipulation, but to prepare for a ceremony where she might meet the person who would hold her stories. You imagine a healer teaching a boy how to crush bark just right, so that his offering wouldn't cause a rash but might cause a blush. These weren't seduction tricks. They were expressions of care, of readiness, of reverence. And they were all considered dangerous by men who didn't understand the language of the body unless it was spoken in confession. In Sex with Kings, Eleanor Herman details how European royal courts were filled with aphrodisiacs of dubious origin, ambergris, crushed pearls, dried beetle wings, and how courtesans used them like currency. But here in the Amazon, those same substances were part of a conversation with nature. The jungle didn't give you something because you paid for it. It gave because you asked respectfully, because you knew what you were asking for. That nuance was lost when the aphrodisiacs were exported like spices. Without the jungle's context, they became caricatures of themselves. Historians still argue whether the missionaries genuinely believed they were saving souls or simply wanted to control. Resources including the knowledge of plant-based sensuality. Some letters suggest awe, others contempt, but nearly all of them mention the rituals, the potions, the plants. They couldn't look away. The jungle's power disturbed them, but it also intrigued them. And what they couldn't destroy, they documented. Not to preserve. To claim. You find a scrap of something near a collapsed wall. Cloth, maybe. Stained, frayed, almost dust. But it smells of something sweet and pungent, like the ghost of a love letter written in oil. You press it to your face, inhaling a scent that hasn't existed in perfumed bottles for centuries. And in that moment, you realize this isn't just a place where aphrodisiacs were made. It's a place where they were taken, repackaged, watered down, turned into whispers without origin. The wind stirs the leaves above you, not harshly, just enough to remind you that the jungle is still watching, still waiting, still remembering. And maybe, if you listen closely enough, you can hear the voices of those who came before, not angry, not mournful, but amused. Because even after centuries of theft, appropriation, and translation, the plants still grow, the rituals still exist, and the jungle still seduces not through force, but through patience. You stand, brushing off your hands. There's no monument. Here, no plaque, no museum case. Just earth and ash and the memory of hands that mixed scent with story. You leave the village slowly, passing the ghost of a market stall, the trace of a fire pit, the shadow of a path worn by barefoot dancers. And as you step into the trees again, the scent returns, faint, floral, defiant. The jungle may have been cataloged, but it was never conquered. The forest shifts again, but this time it's not subtle. You smell it before you hear it, and you hear it long before you see anything. The scent, sweet tobacco smoke, roasted meat, and the unmistakable tang of human sweat. The sound, Laughter loud and lazy, punctuated by clinking glasses and the high, drifting notes of a violin that's clearly trying to behave like it belongs in this jungle. And then, almost jarringly, you step into a city. Not the ancient kind. This one was built by rubber, by greed, by monocles and silk gloves and champagne poured into golden cups. Welcome to Manaz during the rubber boom. And more importantly for your journey, welcome to the brothels powered by stolen aphrodisiacs and desperate colonial hunger. The jungle doesn't vanish here, it just stands back, arms folded, watching the absurdity unfold. The streets are paved. The men wear hats. The women wear corsets so tight they couldn't have danced even if they'd wanted to. But underneath the opera house with its imported marble and glass chandeliers, something more primal simmers. It hums behind shuttered doors and heavy velvet curtains. It pulses in the perfume-laced air of the cabarets where the rules of the empire melted under the Amazon heat. This is where the old forest magic got a makeover and a price tag. You walk through a narrow alleyway and find yourself staring at a sign, hand-painted in crooked French, Maison Botanique. A brothel, yes, but not just any. This was the place where the European elite came not just for bodies, but for Amazonian elixirs, said to turn mere passion into revelation. On the menu, jungle tonics, exotic infusions, night powders, and a liqueur described only as tiger's breath. None of the patrons knew what was in them. That wasn't the point. What mattered was the mystery, the idea that somewhere in the dense green world outside the city, plants were still whispering secrets, and that those secrets had been bottled just for them. Inside, everything glowed. Low lighting, red velvet. The air so saturated with scent, it clung to your skin like silk soaked in fever. You imagine the ritual. A man wealthy, bored, colonial, arrives after the opera. Silk cravat loose, top hat crooked. He's handed a glass of something amber and thick, told to sip, told to wait, told that the drink contains the bark of a tree kissed by moonlight, the oil of a vine that once curled around a lover's hammock. Does it work? Maybe, maybe not, but it doesn't matter. Because belief is the strongest aphrodisiac of all, and in this place, belief is poured generously. Women in these brothels weren't just companions. They were curators. Many had roots in local tribes or had grown up with grandmothers who taught them the real recipes before those recipes got corrupted. Some still used them quietly. A drop of guarana behind the ears, a spritz of plantain, and spice between the thighs, not to trick, to remind that the forest had always known things that science was too embarrassed to ask about. In Sex with Kings, Eleanor Herman writes about royal mistresses who used perfumes and tinctures not just to seduce, but to survive. The women of Manaz understood this too. They weren't selling just sex. They were selling access to the idea that maybe, just maybe, there were still places in the world where the wild and the intimate hadn't been tamed. And for a few coins more, they'd give you a story to go with it. There's one tale that circulates among the old records, half report, half legend, about a woman known only as La Rosa Negra. She worked in Maison Botanique and was said to make her own potions. They weren't for sale, only for those she chose. No one knew what she used, but men left her room dazed, shaken, suddenly tender. One colonel abandoned his commission and took up painting. Another wrote poetry until his hands trembled, and his family sent him home in shame. La Rosa Negra didn't care. She kept mixing her brews. The jungle, she said, didn't make you fall in love. It made you remember how much you wanted to. Historians still argue whether these brothel tonics contained real aphrodisiac compounds or were just clever branding. Some modern pharmacologists claim the ingredients were placebos at best. Others quietly admit that we still don't fully understand the biochemical effects of many Amazonian plants, especially when fermented, combined, and served under candlelight by someone who's looking directly into your soul. You exit the brothel and wander toward the opera house. It gleams under gaslight, absurd and elegant, like a misplaced jewel. Imported Italian marble, French tile, crystal shipped down the river like treasure, all for the rubber barons who sat, stiff-backed in velvet seats, pretending they weren't thinking about the potions they'd just swallowed. Inside, Bizet or Puccini might be playing, but outside, the real performance is unfolding. Women in dresses too tight for the weather, men sweating under topcoats, jungle scents drifting through perfume like rebellion in bloom. Small cafe nearby still serves what it calls rainforest cordial, a leftover from those nights. You sip it. It tastes like guava and ghosts, sweet at first, then bitter, then inexplicably hot. The waitress winks. It doesn't do anything, she says, unless you want it to. And that's the trick, isn't it? These aphrodisiacs weren't about chemistry. They were about suggestion, invitation. The idea that maybe, just maybe, desire could be poured, sipped, stirred. The jungle watched all of this. Let the city rise, let the empire strut, and preen. And then, as the rubber market crashed and the barons fled, it crept back in slowly, softly, wrapping vines around broken lampposts and whispering, "You can't bottle me forever." And it was right. Today, the brothels are shuttered. The marble is cracked, but the recipes, some of them remain. In stories, in families, in dreams. The jungle has a long memory, and a wicked sense of humor. You walk back into the trees, away from the last gaslight glow of Manaz. The scent of perfume fades, the sounds of the city dim. And in your pocket, the warmth of the cordial lingers, not on your tongue, but somewhere deeper. A reminder that once, in the heart of colonial ambition, the wild still found a way to whisper its name. The jungle returns like a lover who's been watching you flirt with someone else all night, quiet, patient, and now just close enough to remind you who actually knows your name. The air thickens, not just with moisture, but with the weight of layered stories, tangled roots, and clashing intentions. You're deeper now, past the broken cities and bottled perfumes, past the myths turned marketing. This is where the real trouble starts, because this is where the worlds collide. This is the realm of cross-cultural aphrodisiac chaos, where one tribe's sacred potion becomes another man's poison, and one man's cure becomes a woman's curse. You arrive at a fork in the trail, and for the first time, there's no clear choice. One path leads through a grove thick with vines you recognize: cachuaba, a known aphrodisiac in many Brazilian communities. The other winds toward a grove where the air smells sharply metallic, touched with the bitter edge of plants that are both medicine and mystery. This is the territory where plants cross tribal lines, where recipes overlap, clash, mutate. And the result? Beautiful, unpredictable, occasionally disastrous. Let's start with the cachuaba. Bark scraped from the tree, boiled with cinnamon and a touch of wild honey. It was said to restore virility, awaken sensual dreams, and banish emotional exhaustion. Used carefully, reverently, it stirred connection. But when Portuguese colonists learned of it, they began exporting it back to Europe, changing the recipe to suit their own palates. They mixed it with brandy, marketed it as Amazonian wine, made it a drink for rich men who wanted to feel young again. And in doing so, they stripped it of its context, its ritual. Soon, people overdosed, got sick, blamed the jungle. But the jungle had never lied. Only the branding did. You walk the path toward the bitter-scented grove and find yourself among plants used by a neighboring tribe, not for seduction, but for revenge. They discovered that certain roots, when combined with alcohol, could heighten arousal to the point of madness. It was used in war, sometimes slipped into the cups of enemies to make them more reckless, more desperate. And yes, it worked, too well. One tribe's aphrodisiac became another tribe's weapon. And soon, Stories spread of men driven into the jungle by hallucinations of lovers who never existed, chasing kisses that belong to ghosts. There's a story you hear whispered from a guide who once lived near the Javari River. A man traded with one tribe to acquire a rare bark, rumored to make women fall in love with the first man they saw after drinking it. He took it home, gave it to the woman he wanted, but she didn't look at him. She looked at his brother. They married. The man vanished into the forest. No one blamed the bark, only the arrogance that thought it could control what was never meant to be owned. You sit on a moss-covered stone as that story lingers in your mind. These aren't just ingredients. They're ecosystems, relationships. Each plant has a history, a personality, a web of meaning that shifts from one village to the next. To mix them without understanding is like trying to translate poetry using the calculator. But that's what happened again and again. Traders carried leaves without legends. Colonists bottled potions without prayers. Scientists extracted compounds and left behind the stories that gave them shape. And the result? Chaos, sometimes fatal. Always fractured dot in the history of sexuality. Foucault notes that desire isn't just a biological fact, it's a cultural construction. And here, in the Amazon, that construction was elaborate, intimate, tied to everything from moon cycles to bird calls to the angle of your shadow at noon. But when cultures collided, when ships arrived with their own myths, their own shame, their own fantasies of the exotic other, those constructions shattered. And from the shards came confusion. Aphrodisiacs that were once about connection turned into tools of manipulation. Love became conquest. Seduction became strategy. You rise and walk deeper into the grove. The air shifts again. You catch the scent of something familiar, marijuana, the potency wood you met earlier. But this time, it smells different. Mixed with clove, with citrus peel. It's not wrong, but it's not right either. This is the version sold in plastic bottles in roadside stalls, marketed as jungle Viagra. The bark is still there, but the soul is gone. It's like hearing a lullaby played on a car alarm. And yet, some of these hybrids worked. Not because of the science, but because of the stubbornness of belief. People wanted these things to work. They wanted to feel more alive, more connected, more open. And sometimes, intention did what chemistry couldn't. Even in confusion, there was still power. Not clean, not sacred, but real. You pass a small shrine, just a stack of stones with a bowl of fruit and a curl of incense. Someone has placed 3 red seeds beside it. Guarana, still respected, still revered. A plant that survived the chaos, not because it resisted change, but because it adapted. Guarana is now found in sodas and supplements worldwide, stripped of its erotic lore. But in some villages, it's still mixed into aphrodisiac drinks. Not because it boosts libido, but because it brings energy, focus, clarity. And in that clarity, people sometimes find the courage to touch someone's hand and say what they've been to afraid to say. You sit beside the shrine and think about everything that's been lost, but also everything that remains. The jungle doesn't mourn, it remembers, and it laughs. Because for every potion diluted, there's another still brewing in the shadows. For every bark misused, a new generation grows it the right way again. And for every stolen story, there's a grandmother whispering it back into her granddaughter's ear. Cross-cultural aphrodisiac chaos didn't destroy the jungle's secrets. It just scattered them, hid them in strange bottles, misnamed them in catalogs, repackaged them with neon labels. But the jungle still knows their true names. And if you're quiet enough, if you sit still in the heat, in the scent, in the rustle of leaves, you might hear them again. You stand, stretch, and follow a trail of petals blown across the forest floor. They lead you out of the grove and into a corridor of tall, straight trees. The light here is soft, diffused, like memory, like recovery. The path ahead is quieter now. Not because the chaos has ended, but because you're beginning to understand it. This isn't a story with clean morals or tidy villains. It's a tangle, a dance, a warning and a blessing. And you, dear wanderer, are still in the middle of it. You're walking now beneath a canopy so high and so dense it turns the midday sun into something soft and golden, like honey dripped slowly through gauze. It casts everything in a warm hush. And for the first time in a while, you don't feel watched. You feel welcomed. The jungle here feels different. Less like a maze, more like a sanctuary. And as you follow the winding path lined with stones, too perfectly placed to be accidental, you realize you're entering a place few remember, and even fewer speak of out loud. You've arrived at the domain of the Forgotten Queens and their love leaves. They don't appear on maps. You won't find their names in history books. But here, in this part of the Amazon, there once lived matriarchal communities, societies governed not just by women, but by women who knew the jungle as intimately as their own skin. Leaders, lovers, medicine makers. Queens without crowns, but with authority pulsing from their fingertips like heat. And central to their world, their ceremonies, and their desires was a plant they called the love leaf. It doesn't look like much. Broad, flat, velvety on one side and slightly iridescent on the other. But in the right hands, with the right preparation, it could inspire loyalty, tenderness, and in some stories, complete submission. You find one growing low to the ground, shy under a curtain of moss. When you touch it, it doesn't flinch. It curls slightly, as if reacting to your body's temperature. The sensation is immediate. Your fingertips buzz, not sharply, but warmly. A tingling, as if the leaf just recognized something in you. That's what the queens believed, that the plant could read desire, that it knew what your heart wanted before you did. They used it in teas, in oils, but most famously in food. In the feasts they prepared for their chosen partners, the ritual was simple. The queen would cook for her guest. She'd prepare a stew flavored with herbs, roots, and a few shredded love leaves. The guest would eat while she watched. If he or she finished the meal and looked up with clear eyes, the ritual was complete. They were bonded, not by spell or potion, but by shared intention. A decision sealed in taste and trust. If they didn't finish the meal, if they hesitated, the queen would send them away. No anger, no explanation. Just the understanding that their hearts weren't aligned. It sounds romantic, and it was. But it was also strategic. These queens weren't ruling with sentiment. They were ruling with clarity. Love was not distraction. It was alliance. Sensuality wasn't indulgence. It was intelligence. The love leaf, used wisely, amplified empathy. It made the tongue more honest, the body more transparent. It didn't create love, it revealed it. Which is much more dangerous. One tale that survives barely tells of a queen called Kara, who ruled for 30 seasons. Her love leaf stew was legendary. It was said no one could lie after eating it. Not to her, not to themselves. Suitors came from far away, drawn by her wisdom and beauty. Some left in love, others left in silence, never speaking of what they saw in their own reflection. Kyra remained unmarried, but she was never alone. Her power came not from withholding affection, but from choosing it with precision. You sit near a patch of the leaves, brushing your hand gently across them, wondering what they might reveal about you if brewed into tea. Would you see clearly the people you've loved? The ones you thought you loved? Would the ache you carry finally have a name? That's the thing about aphrodisiacs like this. They don't whisper, "Want me." They whisper, "Know yourself." And sometimes, that's the most erotic invitation of all. Historians still debate whether these matriarchal communities truly existed, or whether they were romanticized into legend by early European travelers eager for tales of Amazonian Amazons. The name alone, Amazon, traces back to Greek stories of warrior women, projected onto these landscapes like a colonial fever dream. But oral histories in this region tell a different story. Not of warriors in armor, but of women who understood balance. Leadership rooted in nourishment, not conquest. Seduction used not to ensnare, but to align. In the erotic spirit through history, Peter Webb writes about societies where sensuality was not just tolerated, but celebrated, woven into governance, medicine, spirituality. These queens were part of that lineage. Their aphrodisiac rituals weren't secretive. They were sacred, shared in circles of women who passed recipes and rhythms with the same reverence as heirlooms. The love leaf was their oracle. It didn't guarantee love. It demanded honesty. You imagine what the world would look like if that kind of clarity still governed desire. If instead of chasing sparks and chemistry, we all sat down over a meal and let a single plant decide whether our hearts were aligned, maybe we'd fall less. But maybe we'd fall better. The love leaf didn't promise pleasure. It promised understanding. And sometimes, that's more intimate than touch. You rise slowly, the sun filtering through the trees like melted gold, dappled across your shoulders. The leaves don't move as you leave. They've said what they needed to, whispered their truth in tingles and taste. You walk on, the image of Kara lingering, watching her guests eat in silence, deciding nothing with her words, everything with her gaze. She didn't ask for declarations. She didn't demand devotion. She simply waited to see if the food would do the talking, and it did. It always did. You step back into the thicker part of the forest, where vines hang lower and the path is less clear, but something in you feels steadier. Not guided by lust or curiosity or even hunger, but by something quieter. You're not here to be stirred anymore. You're here to be revealed. And in that revelation, there's a different kind of fire. One that doesn't burn, but illuminates. One that doesn't consume, but invites. Ahead, the trail bends toward what smells like smoke and bark and something sweet. Another aphrodisiac waits. But before you meet it, you carry this moment with you. The love leaf still whispering at the edge of your memory, reminding you that the deepest desire is not for conquest. It's for clarity, for resonance, for someone who tastes your offering and says yes not because they're enchanted, but because they recognize something true. The scent hits you like déjà vu dipped in honey, familiar, seductive and just a little suspicious. It floats through the air like a secret that wants to be overheard. It smells like promises whispered under blankets, like candlelight dancing across collarbones, like someone leaning in a little too close and pretending they didn't mean to. You follow it, of course. You've come too far not to. The trail leads you past a cluster of bright plastic wrappers caught in a tangle of vines, past the carcass of a rusted soda can, past a wooden sign nearly rotted away, its paint just barely legible. Libido tea to 100% natural Amazonian formula. Welcome to the modern jungle, where desire has been bottled, barcoded, and sold for $14.99 with a money-back guarantee. You're standing at a roadside stall now, though stall might be generous. It's part shack, part shrine, part souvenir trap. A rainbow of glass. Bottles and plastic sachets line a warped shelf, each promising some version of the same fantasy. Stamina, attraction, confidence, heat. And they all claim the same thing. Made with authentic ingredients from deep in the Amazon. Some even show illustrations, jaguars licking their lips, vines curling seductively around naked silhouettes, leaves arranged in shapes that look more anatomical than botanical. It's a fever dream. A performance of what the outside world thinks the jungle feels like. You pick up a packet. Rainforest passion tea with real cachuaba and love bark. The ingredients list is vague. The dosage. Instructions oddly poetic. Drink before sunset. Wait with your heart open. Do not fear your pulse. It sounds like a spell. It smells like cinnamon and something vaguely chemical. You set it down and scan the others. One claims to contain liquid ecstasy from sacred bark. Another simply reads, "For HIM Wildfire Edition." You can't tell if it's a beverage, a body spray, or a challenge. Here's the truth, though the stuff sells. Not just here, but everywhere. Online, in airports, in hipster health, food shops. Amazonian aphrodisiacs have become their own genre, their own myth machine. And most of them? They're nonsense. Sugar, artificial flavoring, a dash of caffeine, maybe a sprinkle of dried plant matter so minuscule it couldn't seduce a mosquito. But that's not the point. The point is the packaging. The dream. The idea that somewhere, someone found a root that makes you irresistible, and that now you too can own that power. And yet, some of it is real. Some sellers still source cachuaba, murapuama, and guarana from communities that have used them for generations. Some blends are still made with ceremony, with respect. But here's the thing. Even when they work, they don't work how you think. You don't drink a tea and suddenly become James Bond in linen. What happens is subtler, slower. Your heart beats a little deeper. You feel your feet more firmly on the ground. You become aware of your breath, your skin. You remember that you have a body and that maybe, just maybe, it deserves more attention than you've been giving it. That's the aphrodisiac. Not arousal, awareness. You sit on a bench near the stall, watching as a young couple approaches. They laugh, tease each other, pick up a bottle labeled Elixir of the Moon. He opens it. She sniffs, wrinkles her nose. He buys it anyway. Will it work? Probably not. Will they think it works? Maybe, and in that belief, they might laugh a little louder, touch a little sooner. The elixir isn't the magic. They are, but the label gave them permission. There's a story told by a merchant near Balim about a tourist who came seeking something wild. He wanted intensity, power, the real jungle experience. The merchant gave him a tiny vial with no label, just a red thread tied around the neck. "Drink 2 drops, he said. No more. The man returned 2 days later, pale and silent. He never said what happened. He just handed the bottle back, bowed, and left. The merchant never sold that blend again. But he keeps the empty vial on a shelf, just visible, just enough to make you wonder. Historians still argue whether modern aphrodisiac products represent cultural theft, evolution, or survival. Some say they commercialize sacred traditions. Others say they keep those traditions alive, adapted, yes, but still breathing. And then there are those who insist that the whole concept is flawed, that you can't bottle intimacy, that sensuality can't be steeped in a tea bag. They're right, of course. But they're also missing the point. These products aren't about results. They're about desire made visible, tangible, shared. In Kama Sutra, Vatsyayana writes not just of potions and techniques, but of mood, setting, intention. A lover who lights incense before speaking. A partner who brushes scented oil into another's hair, not because it guarantees arousal, but because it invites presence. That's what these little bottles and sachets try to mimic. An invitation. A ritual. A story you tell yourself about what might happen if you just pay attention. You stand and walk behind the stall, where the real plants grow wild and unmarked. No labels, no promises. Just leaves catching sun, vines swaying with the breeze, roots that have been here long before the first brochure was printed. And you realize the irony. The real aphrodisiac isn't on the shelf. It's in the soil. The smell of guarana pulp fermenting. The texture of bark rubbed smooth by careful hands. The sound of wind brushing through cachuaba leaves like a song only lovers understand. You take a deep breath, and for a moment, you feel it, not lust, not excitement, but alignment. As if your body has synced with something older, something softer. A rhythm that doesn't demand performance or perfection, just honesty. That's the gift these plants have always offered. Not to make you sexy, but to make you present. And from that presence, connection grows. You walk back to the path, passing the bottles, the posters, the promises. You don't need them. You've already found what you came for. Not in a packet, not in a vial, but in the space between steps, in the invitation to pause, to breathe, to remember that sometimes the most potent magic isn't in what you take, but in what you allow. You wake up before you even realize you fell asleep, seated beneath a canopy of ferns that look like they've been guarding secrets longer than most empires have existed. The air is cooler now, touched with the gentlest hint of dusk, but you're not alone. Ahead, the forest has changed again, not in color or shape, but in its energy. It hums now, low and steady, like a machine switched on. There's a clearing, perfectly round, ringed by flags made of woven leaves and sticks etched with symbols. In the center, 3 people in white coats, one holding a tablet, the other 2 kneeling beside what looks like a chemistry set arranged on jungle soil. You've wandered into the most unexpected ritual of all, the modern research site where science meets the shaman. It's jarring, this sudden appearance of latex gloves and stainless steel in the middle of the Amazon's pulsing heart. But it's not new. For decades now, researchers have been trekking into the jungle to test, catalog, and decode the ancient Aphrodisiacs long dismissed as folklore. Some come with respect, others with dollar signs in their eyes. But all of them arrive chasing the same elusive promise, that maybe, somewhere in these leaves, there's a compound that can crack open the chemistry of connection. You approach, quietly, watching as one of the researchers drops a tiny sample of marijuana root into a beaker. Steam rises. He sniffs it, scribbles something. Another checks the heart rate of a volunteer seated nearby, her arm wired to a monitor, her face calm but focused. This isn't witchcraft. This is Western method meeting forest rhythm. Hypothesis testing ceremony. And it's strange how familiar it all feels, because what is science, if not another form of myth-making? Just one that prefers graphs over chance. You sit with them for a while, asking questions. They tell you they've isolated compounds from dozens of plants known for centuries to stir sensuality. Murapuama, for instance, does appear to influence blood flow and reduce anxiety. Kashuaba contains alkaloids that stimulate the central nervous system. Guarana isn't just caffeine, it's time-release energy married to a slow mood lift. Some substances work best in combination, especially when fermented. And some effects, they admit, still defy explanation. Placebo is powerful, one researcher shrugs. But so is chemistry we haven't mapped yet. One woman, with a soft voice and eyes the color of the forest floor after rain, says something that sticks. We're not trying to prove the plants right or wrong. We're trying to catch up. Because long before Petri dishes and double-blind studies, the shamans knew which plants healed broken hearts, and which ones broke hearts open. They didn't need lab results. They had stories, patterns, generations of whispered wisdom, passed hand to hand like secrets sealed in bark. You ask if they ever worked directly with local shamans. The answer is yes and no. Some communities are open to sharing knowledge, especially if the research will help preserve it. Others are wary, burned too many times by outsiders who came asking questions, but left carrying profits. There are agreements now, protocols, ethics boards. But trust, like roots, takes time to grow. One researcher tells you about a plant they still haven't identified, used only by a single healer in a remote village. When asked what it does, the healer replied, "It shows you the face of the one you miss." They're still trying to figure out what that means in measurable terms. You're handed a small vial clear, sealed with a handwritten label, sample, desire blend. It's not for drinking, just for smelling. You lift it to your nose. It hits instantly warm, earthy, with a citrus twist and something deeper, almost smoky. Your mind flashes with images, the face of someone you loved once but couldn't hold on to, the warmth of a hand on your lower back, the ache of not saying something when it mattered. It's not memory, it's suggestion, and it's powerful. Researchers glance at you amused. That one works, they say. But when you ask what's in it, they just smile. We're still figuring that out. In the history of sexuality, Foucault reminds us that the way we talk about desire often reveals more about power than passion. Here in this jungle lab hybrid, you see that tension up close. On one side, spreadsheets, mass spectrometers, clinical trials. On the other, chants, fire, and bowls carved by hand. Both seek truth, both stumble. Both know that the human heart isn't something you can measure in milligrams. And yet both keep trying. There's a quiet respect here, even when the languages clash. The scientists don't mock the shamans. The shamans don't dismiss the scientists. They circle each other, slowly, like dancers who haven't decided if the music is theirs or borrowed. And maybe that's the lesson, that you don't have to choose between method and mystery. That understanding desire means letting both coexist. Because real connection, the kind that trembles in your chest and makes your skin feel like it's just remembered how to breathe, doesn't belong to one system. It belongs to the spaces in between. You stay until twilight, watching the lab equipment get packed up, samples sealed, leaves documented, notes typed and whispered. One researcher offers you a packet of dried root, harmless, they say, but calming. Not for the bedroom, she laughs. For the heart. You tuck it into your bag, not because you think you'll need it, but because it feels like a keepsake from a temple with fluorescent lights dot as they leave. The forest takes a breath. The clearing dims. The flags rustle. And in the fading light, you feel the jungle reclaim the space, not angrily, but patiently. Like a parent watching a child play dress-up in clothes that don't quite fit. The science will catch up. Or it won't. The plants don't mind. They've been doing this long enough to know that whether you call it a molecule or a miracle, the pulse it stirs is the same. You walk on, deeper into dusk. In your pocket, the vial still hums with scent and story. Ahead, the path darkens. But your step is lighter, because now you carry both the data and the dream. And somewhere in the jungle, the shamans nod. And the science listens. The jungle at night doesn't go silent, it leans in. Every leaf seems to rustle with intention. Every chirp or crack becomes part of a low, murmuring symphony that presses against your skin like warm breath. You walk slower now. Not because you're tired, but because the air has grown thick with presence. The trees loom like patient witnesses. The ground beneath your feet feels less like soil and more like memory. This is no longer just forest. This is conclusion. And in this final stretch of your journey, the path brings you to the one ritual that lingers longer than any potion, longer than any kiss, any spell, any story whispered over a steaming bowl of herbs. It is the closing fire, the farewell ceremony, where aphrodisiacs are not consumed, but remembered. It begins with a circle, always a circle. A shape older than borders, older than language. You enter as others arrive, quietly, without fanfare. Some are strangers. Some familiar faces from earlier paths. That dancer with the snake tattoo. The woman who crushed petals with her fingers and never spoke. The old man who watched you from the shadows near the vine. Each one carries something in their hands. A leaf, a feather, a pinch of dried bark, not to use, to offer. At the center of the clearing is a small fire, barely more than an ember at first. No one rushes. They sit in silence as one elder, barefoot, eyes lined with time, steps forward and begins to speak. Not in a grand voice, not with proclamations, just a steady low murmur that moves like smoke. She tells stories, not legends, not science, but those strange, in-between tales. A woman who drank too much passion root and laughed until the trees answered. A boy who fell in love with a perfume worn by a spirit. A tree that bloomed only when two people touched under it for the first time. You can't tell what's real and what's metaphor, and it doesn't matter. Then the offerings begin. One by one, people step forward and place their object into a shallow clay bowl near the fire. A seed, a sliver of root, a scrap of cloth. The elder doesn't ask what each thing is. She simply nods and the fire grows. The air begins to warm. And now, instead of scent, you feel story. You feel it in your chest, behind your ribs, like a second heartbeat waking up. And here's what they never told you about aphrodisiacs. They don't work because they stimulate blood flow or heighten pheromones or mimic some chemical you're missing. They work because they ask you to believe, to participate, to show up with intention. You never needed the potion. You needed the permission to want, to feel, to remember that your body isn't just a machine, it's an instrument. And desire is its song. The fire grows brighter, and the elder asks everyone to close their eyes. You obey, and in the darkness, behind your lids, everything begins to flicker. Faces, moments, hands brushing against yours, a glance held a second too long. The smell of sweat on linen, laughter in the dark. Not all memories are yours, some feel borrowed. Some feel ancestral. But each one lands in your body like a soft drumbeat. You hear her voice again, saying what sounds like a prayer. For those who came before and carried desire without shame. For those who brewed and burned and whispered and sang. For those whose lips never spoke, but whose hearts reached across distance. May the fire remember them. And then quietly, she begins to name the plants, one by one. Murapuama, Cachuaba, Guarana, the whisper beetle, the love leaf, the jaguar's kiss. Some names you recognize, others are new. But with each one, the fire shifts, changing color, scent, rhythm. It's as if the flames are answering, acknowledging, giving thanks. You open your eyes slowly. The circle is glowing now. Not just from fire, but from what feels like warmth, pulled from the earth itself. And you understand, this isn't the end of the journey, it's the distillation, the concentrate. Everything you've seen, the herbs, the dances, the tattoos, the broken potions on dusty shelves, it all led here. To this final truth, that desire isn't something you summon. It's something you tend, like a fire, like a garden, like a story told to the right person at the right moment, under the right sky dot. Someone hands you a small, leaf-wrapped bundle. Inside, a bit of bark, a tiny bottle of oil, a single red petal. No label, no instructions. Just a whisper from the elder. When the moment comes, you'll know. You don't ask what it's for. You just hold it close. In the erotic spirit through history. Peter Webb argues that sensuality has always been about connection, not just between bodies, but between moments, between places, between layers of the self. This ceremony isn't a finale, it's a reunion. You've met the forest. Now you meet yourself again, more open, more aware, more willing to carry these lessons back into a world that forgets them too quickly. The fire dims. The circle dissolves. No applause, no announcement. People rise and leave when they're ready. Some touch hands as they pass. Some kiss, some walk alone, smiling. You follow, slowly. The night is deep now, velvet black and starlit. The jungle is quieter, as if exhaling after holding its breath through your journey. You step off the trail for a moment. Sit on a fallen log. Let the sounds come back to you, the rustle, the call, the drip of dew from overfull leaves. You breathe in, and it smells like everything. Bark, sweat, flowers, smoke, longing, laughter, time. You realize there is no single aphrodisiac. There are thousands, each one a door, each one a mirror. each one waiting not to change you, but to remind you that you were never as closed as you feared. Dotting your palm, the bundle glows with warmth. You don't open it. Not yet. The journey ends not with a climax, but with an invitation. To stay soft, to stay curious, to stay open.